plagiarism and how to avoid it. Learn one way that can help your academic success. Welcome to Columbia College. We are so excited that you have decided to pursue your education here. Please know that it is our goal to help you become academically successful while you attend our institution. Many international students have questions about how to do well in their classes. We are here to help. The U.S. academic culture may be different from your home country. That is why it's important to understand those differences in advance. One of the biggest differences that the U.S. education system focuses on is avoiding plagiarism. You do not want to use the words or ideas of others and then represent them as your own. We will discuss more on how to avoid plagiarism when writing your papers and how you can become a more successful student while at Columbia College. So what is plagiarism and what are some repercussions? Plagiarism. Plagiarism is an act of copying the ideas or words of another person without giving credit to that person. You can see that I included a source. This means that I am acknowledging where I found this information, since the definition is not mine. Including the source is called using a citation or citing. It is a very important part of giving credit to the original author. As you can see from these comics, we will discuss how plagiarism is considered a form of stealing. Plagiarizing can lead to serious problems for you while you are at school. Plagiarism is one of the top concerns that international students face while studying in the United States. There can be many consequences if you plagiarize. Plagiarism is considered academic dishonesty, even if it is unintentional. Here are some consequences that you will face if you plagiarize while at Columbia College. You can fail the assignment. You can fail the course. You can also get expelled from school, which means that you would lose your F1 student status. What has happened to international students that have plagiarized? Some students have received academic probation or expulsion. If students are expelled, this means that they can no longer enroll or attend classes at Columbia College. Since enrollment is important to keep your F1 student status, students who face expulsion often lose their immigration status and have to return to their home country. In the U.S., it is considered plagiarism if you turn in someone else's work as your own, copy words or ideas from someone else without giving credit, fail to put a quotation in quotation marks, give incorrect information about the source of a quotation, change words but copy the sentence structure of a source without giving credit, copy so many words or ideas from a source that it makes up the majority of your work, whether you give credit or not. Other cultures may have different rules when it comes to writing. Listen to what this graduate student from Vietnam has to say about plagiarism.
I first learned about plagiarism in my English class in America. In my country, it is acceptable for students to write papers based on other students' papers that were given high scores. When I was in high school, our literature teacher often gave us the outline for the papers we had to write. There was not a lot of room for creativity and personal opinions when writing. The American education system is different. It requires students to write from their own opinion and not to take thoughts and ideas from other people. If an international student is convicted of plagiarism, the highest punishment could be termination of your service record. So it is critical to avoid plagiarism if students want to be successful in their study in America. I think the differences between American education system and other countries can be confusing for international students who have been used to a particular way of learning. It took me about 1 week to familiarize myself with plagiarism and how to avoid it. I think the concept of plagiarism is pretty easy to understand, but knowing the correct way to cite sources is difficult because there is a specific way of citation for each type of source.
Let's provide some examples of plagiarism so you can better understand this concept. This is what you read in your book. Childhood lead poisoning has declined steadily since the 1970s when cars stopped spewing leaded exhaust into the environment and lead paint was formally banned. Yet 40% of the nation's homes still contain lead paint from the first half of the 20th century, and 25% still pose significant health hazards. This is what you wrote. Lead poisoning in children has been in decline since 1970 because cars stopped using leaded gas and lead paint was no longer allowed. Still, 40% of American homes still contain lead and 25% are still dangerous. What is wrong with what you wrote? There was no credit given to the original person who gave these facts. You also tried to paraphrase, but it is too similar to the original source. Let's look at one more example of plagiarism. This is what you read in your book. Increasingly, researchers have been turning to identical and fraternal twins for answers with dramatic results. They are finding that genetics, in addition to familial interests, educational, social, and other environmental pressures, have a considerable impact on how we choose what we do and how happy we are with that choice. This is what you wrote for your paper. To answer the question of how genetics influence career choices, researchers have turned to identical and fraternal twins with impressive results. They have found that genetics, in addition to familial interests, educational, social, and other environmental pressures, have a major impact on how people choose what they do and how satisfied they are with that choice. Siegel 54. What's wrong with what you wrote? Even though you tried to cite the original source and the author at the end of the paragraph, you had only changed a few words around. The words that are written in blue, Siegel 54, indicate that you tried to give the author credit. You wrote the author's last name, Siegel, and the page number of where you found this information, 54. Your paper can still be marked for plagiarizing if you do not cite sources correctly. There are certain formats and rules you must follow when citing sources and giving proper credit to the author. So after learning about plagiarism, seeing examples, and learning about consequences, how can you avoid plagiarism? Correctly cite sources to avoid plagiarism. Citing a source means that you show within your paper that you took words, ideas, statistics, etc. from another place. Citations contain all the information necessary to identify publications, including author name, title of books, articles, and journals, date of publication, page numbers, volume, and issue number. To correctly cite sources, you should know the type of paper you are writing. Does your class require you to write an MLA or APA format? MLA and APA require different paper formats, as well as ways of using citations. MLA stands for Modern Language Association, while APA stands for American Psychological Association. APA is often used in social science courses, while MLA is often used in classes that focus on the humanities and the liberal arts. Always check your class's syllabus to determine which writing style is required for the class, or simply just ask your professor. If what you are writing is common knowledge, you don't need to cite it. What is common knowledge? Common knowledge is information that the majority of people already know. Common knowledge can be found in many sources. Example of common knowledge. There are 4 seasons in the year. There are 365 days in a year. George Washington is the first president of the United States. Research papers will not have common knowledge in it. To avoid plagiarism, you can use direct quotations. A direct quotation is when you copy and paste somebody's exact words in your writing. You must use the quotation marks and a citation of the original source. Example: in the book you read, students often had difficulty understanding citations. Then you wrote with direct quotations. According to Peter, 2015, students often had difficulty understanding citations. Page 2. There are direct ways of giving credit to the author when writing your papers. Some students will choose to use quotation marks. You may ask, why should you use quotation marks? When you want to present the exact same language as the original author, quotations are necessary. Here are some examples of how you can start quotations. According to Oprah Winfrey, Roger Smith states that Smith remarks, Brad Pitt concludes, Pitt adds. There are many ways that you can start a quotation. Just ask your professor if you have any questions about this process. Using direct quotations correctly. This is what you read in your book. The first technology was the primitive modes of communication used by prehistoric people before the development of spoken language. This is what you wrote using direct quotations correctly. In examining technology, we have to remember that computers are not the first technology people have had to deal with. Frick, 1991, believes that the first technology was the primitive modes of communication used by prehistoric people before the development of spoken language. Page 10. You can see that in the direct quote that you used quotation marks. You also gave credit to the author named Frick by properly citing the source, year, and page number of where you found this information. Now, let's look at the plagiarized version. In examining technology, we have to remember that computers are not the first technology people have had to deal with. The first technology was the primitive modes of communication used by prehistoric people before the development of spoken language. The plagiarized version does not use any quotation marks and has 0 citations. Anyone who would read the plagiarized version would think that you were the original author of these thoughts. If you do not use direct quotations, you can try paraphrasing or summarizing what the author wrote and then use a citation. When you paraphrase, you rephrase or reword the author's writing by structuring the sentence differently and then writing from your own understanding. You also use a particular format in your paper to indicate when you have begun paraphrasing what the author wrote. Always remember to cite your source if you choose to paraphrase. Take a minute to read this example of a scholarly article. Now that you have read this article, how could you paraphrase or summarize this information into your paper? Here are some examples of what it looks like to paraphrase and summarize what you read on the previous slide. Paraphrasing. Randler, 2009, states that people who are naturally morning people often also display traits that are considered proactive. He also suggests that late risers may not show as many proactive traits because they naturally operate on a different sleep schedule. Page 2793. Summarizing. Recent research shows that people who are not naturally early risers often have persistent issues adjusting themselves to the morning-oriented schedule of most schools and workplaces, and because of this, may be less proactive in their behaviors. Randler, 2009. The exact same wording was not used when paraphrasing or summarizing. Also, a different sentence structure was used. However, you can notice that in both instances that citations were used to give credit to the author. Now, let's test your knowledge to see if you can identify a direct quote versus a paraphrase. This is what you read. In comics, at its best, words and pictures are like partners in a dance, and each one takes turns leading. When both partners try to lead, the competition can subvert the overall goals. Let's look at what you wrote. Number 1. Comics are most successful when the words and pictures are alternately subordinate to each other, and less successful when the words and pictures fight for dominance on the page. McLeod, 1027. Is this a paraphrase, or is this a direct quote? The answer is paraphrase. Let's look at number 2. According to Scott McLeod, in comics, at its best, words and pictures are like partners in a dance, and each one takes turns leading. When both partners try to lead, the competition can subvert the overall goals. 1027. Is this a paraphrase or direct quote? Number 2 is a direct quote. When in doubt, use a direct quotation. If you have difficulty writing in your own words, it is better to use a direct quotation. Paraphrasing and summarizing means that you cannot copy the sentence and replace or change only a few words around. This is called patch writing, which triggers plagiarism detecting programs. Collect all your sources with a reference page. All of the sources that you used in your paper should be included in a reference list. This list should appear at the end of your paper. It provides the information necessary for a reader to locate and retrieve any source you cite in your paper. Each source you cite in the paper must appear in your reference list, and each entry in your reference list must be cited in your paper as well. Your reference page at the end of your paper should look something like this. You might note that this example is done in MLA style as well. Advice on writing papers. Give credit to the person who wrote it by using proper citations. This lets readers know that you are using somebody else's idea, work, or opinion. You must cite others' work, facts, ideas, statistics, diagrams, drawings, music, and words whenever you use them. This includes internet sites without authors or copyright dates. Whether you quote, paraphrase, or summarize a single phrase or a whole chapter, you must acknowledge the original author, no matter how much of it you use or how often you use it. You do not have to cite your independent material that you have created, or if it is common knowledge. Cite sources from your previous papers and/or assignments as well. There are many different websites and apps that you can use to double-check your work. These websites help clarify if there are any plagiarism issues with the paper that you have written. There are many ways to get help when writing a paper. You can always ask your professor or go to the Writing Center on campus. Their information is located on this slide. Remember, there are many resources at Columbia College that will help you become a successful student while you are here. Please be sure to utilize these resources as much as possible. And remember, we are CC.